Welcome to the lesson on the central and peripheral nervous system. In this lesson, we'll be taking a look at the different parts of both the central and peripheral nervous system. We'll also talk about the parts of the brain, and we'll talk about specifically what each of the parts of the brain is responsible for with regards to your function. We'll wrap up the conversation with discussing the different types of the nervous system within the peripheral nervous system. All right, the central nervous system is made up of your brain and spinal cord. And of course, the central nervous system is one of two divisions of your human nervous system. So the central nervous system, your brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is everything else. Next, we're going to take a look at the brain diagram that's in your blue workbook. So if you don't have that with you, go ahead and pause and grab that. And we start with the left hemisphere. This is the brain diagram that is a top view. And then down here at number 2, we have the convolutions, which are the folds in the brain. Number 3 will be the right hemisphere. And up here, number 4 will be the fissure, the crack, if you will, between the left and right hemisphere of the brain. Here's your top view diagram. Your bottom view diagram has structure 1 is the thalamus, okay, which is right here. Number 2 is the cerebrum, which this is large part on top here. Number 3 is the hypothalamus, which sits underneath the thalamus. 4 is the pons. 5 is the medulla oblongata. And number 6 is the spinal cord. All of this makes up what is called the brain stem. And number 7 is the cerebellum. Okay, and we'll talk about the specific parts of the brain and what each is responsible for here next. Now let's take a look at the various parts of the central nervous system. We'll start with the cerebrum. Cerebrum has 2 hemispheres connected by a band of tissue, the corpus callosum. There is a neural crossover, which means the left half of the body is controlled by the right half of the brain and vice versa. The cerebrum controls thought, learning, memory, interpretation, sensory integration, and motor coordination. The prefrontal cortex is involved in decision making and your personality. The first known example of damage to the prefrontal cortex was the story of Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was a rock blaster who had an accident in which the tamp iron, which is what you tamp the gunpowder into the hole with, which by the way is 1.25 inches in diameter, just over 3 feet long, and weighed 13 pounds. As he shoved it into the hole, his head and face ended up being over the hole, and it sparked on a rock and ignited the gunpowder. This blew the rod through his skull, and he remarkably lived. But because it went through his prefrontal cortex, he ended up with damage to his prefrontal cortex, and it ended up changing his personality. This is the first known case in which they began to understand that damage to that prefrontal cortex is related to personality, and made that connection there. Pretty cool story. I would encourage you to go look it up. The left half of the cerebrum is primarily verbal, logical, and sequential. The right half is primarily pictorial, holistic, intuitive, and nonverbal. In split brain patients, for example, when a surgery is done to mitigate severe cases of epilepsy, the person acts as if they have two separate brains with completely different functionality. Memory is divided into immediate, short-term, and long-term memory, all of which are stored in different places in the cerebrum. Language learning is done in several parts of the brain. The part of the brain which stores grammar and syntax knowledge seems to switch over at about age 5 to 8 to a different part of the brain, which accounts for the difficulty in learning second languages after that time. Some disorders of the cerebrum include visual agnosia, inability to recognize, interpret visual input. Another one is idiot savant syndrome. These people show amazing ability in certain tasks, but average to below average ability at everything else. And dyslexia, difficulty with interpreting verbal information. Next part of the brain we're going to take a look at is the thalamus. The thalamus is a sensory relay, responsible for information reaching the correct interpretive part of the cerebrum. The disorder of the thalamus is called synesthesia, where sensory input is misinterpreted because it is sent to the wrong interpretive center in the cerebrum. The next part we'll take a look at is the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is responsible for the cyclic processes such as hibernation and mating cycles in other mammals, regulation of body temperature, sleep cycles, and also one of the centers of emotion. Sleep and dreaming is poorly understood. It involves several stages, only one of which, REM, rapid eye movement, involves true dreaming. Sleepwalking and night terrors occur in deep sleep, not in REM. Hypnagogic experiences, dreams in light sleep, are experienced by about 20% of people. Lucid dreams, this is being aware that you're dreaming while you're dreaming, occurs in about 10% of people. The purpose of dreaming is unknown, but all mammals studied go through REM, and it's known that REM is depressed or absent in schizophrenics. The midbrain is a relay which delivers information into the entire cerebrum. The cerebellum. The cerebellum is involved in automatic motor coordination, posture, balance, and equilibrium. Damage results in ataxia, which is dizziness, loss of motor coordination, and this part of the brain is seriously affected by alcohol consumption. Next is the pons. The pons is the relay to and from the higher parts of the brain. Next, the medulla oblongata. This coordinates involuntary muscles such as heart, the diaphragm, and the muscles of the digestive system. And lastly, the spinal cord. The spinal cord relays all information to and from the brain and is involved in reflexes. What this indicates is that sometimes nerve signals don't need to go all the way to the brain in order to be processed. Sometimes they go to the spinal cord and quickly go back, such as in the case of putting your hand on a hot stove. That's why you're able to have a reflex reaction so quickly. All right, next the parts of the peripheral nervous system. We have the somatic, which is the voluntary nervous system, versus the autonomic, the involuntary nervous system. In the autonomic, there are two categories. The sympathetic, which is the emergency response system, speeds up your heart, increases blood pressure. This is the nervous system that causes you to freak out. And then you have the parasympathetic nervous part of the autonomic peripheral nervous system. And this reverses the effects of the sympathetic nervous system to return the body back into homeostasis. All right, that'll do it for our notes on the central and peripheral nervous system. Let's take a look at this video, which will add discussion to what we've talked about so far in this lesson.